We're talking this morning with Rabbi Jeremy Gimple from Israel. He lives in Neve Daniel. Jeremy is the Deputy Director of the World Mizrahi Religious Movement, and he is a television and media personality within Israel. He also is a host of a very, very popular radio program called Israel Inspired Radio on iTunes, and hosts a popular Tuesday night program called Live in Jerusalem, and is a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. Welcome to Sydney, Jeremy.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Jeremy, we've had many controversial programs on Australian television regarding Israel, but none as controversial as a recent one, which dealt with the treatment of Palestinian children by IDF members. This program told stories of how the children were pulled from their homes in the early hours of the morning, and how they were incarcerated in cages and outside prisons. And there is no doubt that the Israeli government in recent months has taken steps to improve their lot. You served in the IDF. Did you see much of this?
Never in my life. What I would like to do is to compare Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, to the countries that are just around our neighborhood, where Bashar Assad in Syria is poisoning, gassing, and slaughtering his own people. The people in Egypt are dying of starvation as they're being beaten to death by their own police state. The entire Arab world around us is in total chaos. There is one democracy that actually holds human dignity and the sanctity of human life as a pillar of our society. And we are the only country that is criticized by local Australian journalists, where I see no television programs about the treatment of any of the Arabs in the Arab countries, where there is one country that is the only moral force in the Middle East. And in my years serving in the Israeli army, I have only seen good men doing their very best to be good people.
Now, in terms of the IDF, there is an organization in Israel called Breaking the Silence, run by Yehuda Shaul. And this organization sets out to show the world at large some of the terrible things that they believe that the IDF has done in the course of its duty. Do you know much about this organization? And if so, what can you tell us?
I've heard of the organization. They're quite hated in Israel, particularly by the IDF, an organization that seeks to undermine the security of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Psychologically, children that are often abused blame themselves for the abuse that they receive from their parents. And the Jewish people, for 2,000 years, have lived in persecution, lived through Holocaust and pogroms and Muslim oppression. And there are Jews inside them that blame themselves for their own oppression. And so here we have an organization that sees that the world is often criticizing Israel. And here, instead of blaming people that are sending their children to blow up buses and shoot rockets onto children's kindergartens, they blame themselves for the problems. And they'll say, oh, it must be the settlements that were established in 1967 that are the obstacle to peace in the Middle East. And yet the war of 1967, when the Arab countries tried to throw us into the sea and annihilate all of the Jews in the land of Israel, there were no settlements yet. And in 1948, there were no settlements in 1948. So there are many organizations and people and Jews that, they have a sickness inside them, a self-hatred that they can't get rid of. And so they'll blame anyone or everyone, and everyone ultimately will be themselves.
The IDF is one of the world's great armies, and at the present moment moves are underway to get members of the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox movement in Israel, to join the army. Up until now, and I understand this was part of Ben-Gurion's original scheme, that they were exempt. When Ben-Gurion came up with this idea, there weren't very many of them. Today, the situation is quite different.
Indeed.
What's your feelings about A, that they should serve within the army, and B, those who oppose it?
Well, exceptional people are always exempt from service in the army. Exceptional athletes are exempt from service in the army in order to train for maybe the Olympics. Exceptional educators as well, I believe, should be exempt from army service. The cream of the crop should be studying, perfecting their skills, learning how to teach, learning how to learn. But the larger society, I think that it is a moral obligation, if you would want a country to service you, to fund your institutions, to give you health benefits, to protect you, that you should also serve that country. And I think that religiously, as a religious Zionist, I look throughout Jewish history and I see that Moses and Joshua were great Torah scholars, yet they went out to battle. The judges of Israel, Gideon, Samson, Devorah, great Torah scholars, they went out to battle. King David, the author of our Psalms, a spiritual man, led his men into battle. Hanukkah, the Maccabees were priests that served in the Holy Temple. Can we get holier than priests in the temple? They led the battle against the Greeks. And here we have Rabbi Akiva. Is there a Talmid Chacham or a Torah sage greater than Rabbi Akiva? Together with Bar Kokhba, he led the revolt against the Romans. So I look throughout Jewish history and I see never before in the history of the Jewish people have people used Torah study to evade defending Jewish lives. And I would say that the same is today. But Israel is a unique country because the Jewish people are not a religion. We're a people. And we're a people because ultimately we are descendants from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're one large extended family. Therefore, we have a communal sense different than other religions. And, Israel really is the largest family reunion, probably in all times. And so when you have family reunions, sometimes there's a little bit of dysfunction, especially if the family hasn't been in touch for a long time. So we have different cultures, different languages, different ideologies all coming back together in Israel. And what we're witnessing now is history in the making. And we're learning how to finally get along. Was the law passed a wise law? Not really. There were much better solutions that could have been proposed. But it will be settled out through over the years, and ultimately we will all integrate and we all will serve, and ultimately, hopefully, we'll have not only a moral army, but a holy army as well.
Jeremy, on the subject of family, you're an extremely proficient communicator. You've been talking to the children in our day schools in Sydney. What message have you been delivering to them?
That often children in high school are struggling with religious practice, religious faith. Sometimes they're forced to pray in certain times, and they themselves are struggling with their belief in God and their understanding of religion. And that combination is quite dangerous for a healthy upbringing religiously and spiritually. And so I tried to maybe shift my message to a larger picture rather than the particulars of religion to the ideas behind Judaism, and that ultimately the story of the Jewish people is the greatest story humanity has ever told. That a tiny, scattered, persecuted people have ultimately shifted global consciousness in ways that no other people ever have. They've been ingathered to their ancient homeland and made the desert blossom. They've made an ancient language speak again. That's never happened before. All of these visions envisioned by the prophets of Israel are coming to pass in our time, and the story of the Jewish people continues. And my message to them was that, what is their place in the story of the Jewish people? How can they be the biggest characters possible and make the biggest impact on the history of our people? And I think with a larger vision where they see that they're living for something a little bit higher than just their own personal lives, it gives them a sense of purpose and a sense of destiny. And ultimately, I think that word, Jewish destiny, isn't mentioned enough. So I try to speak of maybe the future or the destiny of the Jewish people. And I think it was quite successful.
Understanding the destiny of the Jewish people is a message that you've also been delivering to Christian groups. You do quite a lot of this, don't you?
I haven't spoken to Christian groups in a few years, but I host a radio show on iTunes, and it's quite popular. And I can tell that the vast majority of my listeners, I would say 60%, are non-Jewish listeners. And so although I'm directing my message to a Jewish audience, I'm very aware that many of my listeners are indeed non-Jews. So if I ever say a word in Hebrew, I'll always translate it into English and try to make my Jewish message as universal as possible. And it's fascinating because I think the non-Jewish fascination with Judaism in Israel is unprecedented. 100 years ago, there would be no rabbi that would have any success speaking to a non-Jewish community. And, Madonna now has a Hebrew name, and all these Hollywood stars are learning Kabbalah. And there's a whole Christian Zionist movement that are reconnecting. Now, some of them are celebrating Shabbat and trying to adopt Jewish practices. And so here we have an opportunity to finally be a light unto the nations, what Isaiah envisioned us to be. And so it's a fascinating phenomenon, and to me it's quite exciting.
On a final note, Jeremy, around the Jewish world, we seem to be under increasing attack through BDS and certainly through bad media. This can be quite uncomfortable for some communities in the diaspora. Do you have a message for them, especially on the subject of Aliyah?
Yes, not only Aliyah, but every single kid in high school needs to come to Israel. And every single kid after high school needs to come to Israel. There need to be 2 trips that are taken. One at a very foundational stage in the beginning of their development, where they can see Israel and fall in love with it at a young, beautiful age. And then another trip a little bit later when they're a little bit more mature, where their thinking is a little bit more sophisticated, again to encounter a more modern Israel. And those 2 trips really do away with breaking the silence. They do away with the BDS movement, because the people then can see the soldiers. They can go to the settlements. They can see the situations. The matter with the settlements, in the settlement that I live in, there's a security fence, and there's a 24-hour-a-day patrol around the settlement, 24 hours a day. And when you look at the Arab village across the way, you'll see it doesn't have a security fence. And you wonder, well, that's peculiar. Why don't they have a security fence? Why do we need a security fence? If we're the aggressors, why do we have a security fence and they don't have a security fence? And lo and behold, because they're not nervous that some Jewish terrorist is going to go into their community in the middle of the night and slaughter their family. It's because we are. And so it's quite simple when you come and see the reality of Israel and the reality of the IDF. Then you come and see and you walk away with a sense of marvel and wonder and majesty that a bunch of Holocaust survivors and Jews, refugees from Arab countries, were able to make a living paradise in the land of Israel. And the war that we're facing in Israel is not simple. And to be in a constant daily contact with the enemy is not simple. And there are challenges and there are hardships. And ultimately, these are kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. So there are a lot of challenges that the IDF faces. But I would challenge any army in the world to stand side by side with the Jewish army, and the power of the morality of the IDF is absolutely unparalleled.
Rabbi Jeremy Gimple, thank you very much for your time this morning. It is much appreciated.
Thank you.
Bye.